every transition comes with challenges, every single one. It can be starting a new job, it could be moving to a new city, or it could be something as severe as completely changing your life. One of the most difficult transitions is leaving the military. Veterans often hear, "Thank you for your service." And yeah, it's nice to hear, but that's not what we need. And that's not what we want. What we need is an opportunity for a job. We need an opportunity for a career and a direction. Veterans, like everybody else, we simply want to belong. Today, we're going to discuss ways to bring the civilian world and the veteran communities together. Now, it's going to require communication and training on both sides. Fortunately, we have someone who knows how it's done. My guest today is Dave Nordel. Now, Dave is a retired United States Air Force Command Chief Master Sergeant. It's the highest rank you can get as an enlisted person. With over 30 years of service, he holds a bachelor's degree in registered nursing, specializing in emergency medicine, a master's degree in disaster and emergency management. He is a Bronze Star combat decorated medic and the recipient of the Legion of Merit, which is the 6th highest military decoration this country gives. He was also, and this is really impressive, he was also the senior enlisted leader for all nuclear missile forces in the United States. He's now the founder and owner of Max Fab Consulting, where he's a leadership coach, a consultant, a keynote motivational speaker, a military transition expert. And in his spare time, he's committed to creating veteran-ready communities. Dave, welcome to Life Altering Events.
I love it, Frank. I should just reverse this on you, right? And say, Frank's a superstar and he's also a San Francisco Giants fan, so it makes you a double winner.
Yeah,
it's awesome. Yeah, I loved talking to you before we did this and kind of getting caught up and our turf, our where we originated from, our DNA,
exactly,
which is part of this conversation is
exactly.
is so important. So yeah, I appreciate the introduction. For the listeners out there that are going to absorb this military experience as we talk about it, the introduction is kind of a little peek under the tent, because as well as I do, when somebody reads that stuff about you, you're completely uncomfortable. It actually makes you squirm in your seat, because after, and I did over 30 years, but after however long you've served in the military, the first thing that they beat out of you on day one is I and me. You're not allowed to do that. So think about what kind of job interviews veterans give when they can't say I and me.
That's right.
A veteran would never walk in with a bio written like that. And I will guarantee you that bio, even though I gave some of the tidbits, I needed help writing that bio, because people said, no, it needs to read like this. And I said, it's too much. And they said, no, it's not. This is how this works. And so I was back. You called me, you're saying that I retired as a chief, and that's as high as you can go. The day that you leave the military, you are an E1, airman basic, private, whatever it is, ground level pound, with your experience in transition. And quite frankly, there is no training for transition, at least not yet. And it's a little bit lonely. So I appreciate all that.
No, there's not. No, there's not. So share your background, Dave. It's really incredible. You have this where you always compare the farm and the military. Let's touch on that.
Yeah. And you kind of know where I grew up. So, when you say California, I think people stereotypically think that you've got blonde hair, you're on a beach and you're hitting the surfboard and, not 90210 or whatever TV shows out there. Actually, my home looked like something from the middle of Wisconsin or Indiana or Montana, where I'm at now. I grew up in Northern California. In between, Chico's probably the biggest town that people would know, in between Chico and Orland, California, out on a dairy farm in the middle of nowhere, a town that had less than 5,000 people. It had one stoplight. It was absolutely in the wrong place, and my life came with everything that involves. And so when you go out in the world, there's a lack of perspective. There's a lack of, you come with some bias and some assumptions that aren't true. And so you've got to transition from that. But everything you need to know in life and leadership is on the farm. And, when I talk about that, in the books I talk about that, because there's life and death, there's adversity, there's a need for resilience. The work is never done. You have to turn into some sort of strategic thought leader. You have to be agile. You have to be a logistician. You've got to be a project manager. You have to be all of these things. And then everything in life is happening around you. Life, death, birth and death and there's injury, and Mother Nature gets involved, things you can't control, and how you handle all that type of stuff. And then the self-discipline piece, right? You don't meet lazy farmers because they're not farmers anymore, because if you're a lazy farmer, you don't stay in farming because you won't make a living. And so there's that thing of, you got to get up and go. So I always joke, I tell people I went into the military. When you grow up on a dairy farm, you're up at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. I always joke that I went to the military so I could sleep in. My training instructor didn't appreciate that because I said that was a little bit of a moment, but you take those lessons and you move forward with that, and they serve you well. Now, I will tell you, that is a bubble in itself, and there's some myopia, and then you get to a barracks in 1984 in San Antonio, Texas, and then you start learning all over again. So yeah,
Exactly. Now you did 30 plus years in
yeah,
emergency medicine, emergency
yeah,
management.
yeah.
How did that shape coming from the farm and seeing
Yeah.
everything and then going into that? How did that shape your leadership style?
Oh, yeah, amazing. So my very first, I went to basic training, I went to medic school in Wichita Falls, and then my first assignment was in Spain, about 20 minutes just north of downtown Madrid.
Mm.
19 single, first assignment downtown Madrid, 2 years, really rough, terrible, awful stuff. Cold War, so we weren't, the military we know today didn't exist. In the Cold War, you went to the base that you deployed from, that you fought from, and that's where you were at. Uh, and my first job in the Air Force was delivering babies.
Mm.
And I remember I got my initial training, and we're going in for the first delivery. And I remember my first supervisor, his name was George Castaneda. We still stay in touch. And George was from Chicago. And George says to me, he goes, "Now this is really bloody." He goes, "How are you going to do with this much blood?" I said, "I grew up on a dairy farm." I said, "I watch this stuff happen every single day." Right. So how does that transition into leadership? Well, I will tell you one thing. It certainly prepares you to take on things that other people may think are really difficult. You already have the ability to kind of put things in perspective, slow things down so that you can make better decisions, and not rush. Those that have known me my whole life will say, "Man, sometimes you were just like this." Well, sometimes you're like that because you've already got some preparatory things. But I had a guy that grew up a year behind me in high school. So think about this little itty bitty town, year behind me in high school. Went out in the world, got his PhD as a molecular biologist, and he's actually the dean of the one of the colleges here at our university. So we ended up in Billings, Montana. After doing all of our stuff, we ended up in Billings, Montana together. And I had him on my podcast, and I said, "Kurt," I said, "why?" Him and I did some leadership during COVID together. I shouldn't say did. We ran all the COVID operations for the university. And I said, "Kurt, how come we're so similar in leadership approaches and philosophies, especially with taking care of people?" And I think you'll really like this, Frank, because he goes, "Dave," he goes, "think about on the farm." He goes, "the animals always ate first." He goes, "from the day that we were little tiny kids, we've been serving, and it's never been about us." And I actually have some going away presents from some of my assignments that on the plaques, the little quote, you always get tagged with something that comes out of your
That's
mouth
right.
constantly. The little quote says, "It's not about you." Because as I was grooming other leaders, and I had other, leaders underneath me that were leading, I would always probably start off everything with, "We need to remember, it's not about you. You'll get yours, but you got to take care. You got to take care of everybody else." And so it's pretty natural to be given 5 airmen, 10 airmen, 20 airmen, and in my last job, 10,000. It's pretty natural to default to taking care of the masses and serving. It's servant leadership has become cliche, and there's no 5 ways, 12 hows, or 7 habits to leadership. It's messy. You got to jump in it. You got to get waist deep. It might even be up to your nose, and it might be suffocating you. And so we all have a different journey. We're all going to make mistakes. We've all done it. I've got a friend that wrote a book about toxic leadership, and it's called "We've All Done It." We've all goofed those things up to a certain extent. But in the end, if you stay focused on what you're responsible for, and that's other human beings, I think it's a win. So when you do the farm type stuff, it's a natural, and you don't have to kind of refocus. I told you we might get a visit from this dog. She's
No
good.
problem.
She's good. No, she's great.
One of the things that I learned in the military, I was an emergency room medic, not to the degree you were, but I was an emergency room medic,
Oh.
is when something goes wrong in the military,
Mhm.
good leaders like yourself, you don't jump down someone's throat. First thing, and you put this in your book, first thing is, what happened? And did I adequately train this individual? Touch on that.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, heavens. And this goes to a lot of things in life and leadership. It goes to a lot of things. If you haven't prepared people properly, then it's really your fault, right? And so when we have adversity, when we have failure, we want to know who. It's just natural. There was a car accident. Who was in it? Who was driving? Who was in the other car? And so we we do what we do naturally, because we want to lay blame, right? We want to answer the questions.
Yes.
And instead, you need to know the who, because you need to make sure people are okay, right?
Right.
And there's a dynamic there. You have to make some decisions on that. But it's not the who to lay blame. It's the who, because you need to find out whether or not they were prepared. And when you break it all down, 9 times out of 10, when you have failure, human failure, 9 times out of 10, there was a gap. It either existed through budget cuts are a great example. Just through budget cuts, you create a gap, right? And then you end up spending 3 times as much money trying to refill the gap after you've had failure. So that's a great example. But if you're focused on root cause in a way that's productive, it's protective. Everybody grows through the adversity, because life is adverse. Life is just hard, and you got to get, as the basketball coach at Duke says, she's got a great 2-minute video. She talks about getting better at hard, and so because it's not, there's no easy button, right? So you better start getting better at hard, and so to get better at hard, you need to be able to dissect things, get to root cause, and then bring everybody together, as you march forward, instead of cutting off heads. Guillotining had a purpose. It was to send a message, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work in leadership, especially when you're leading a lot of people. We'll talk about that when we get to the Vet Ready program, because this is where the civilians, and I'm going to share I'll share some things that we just had discovery with our last client that actually had people in tears in the room. I'll share some of that with you. And really what it comes down to is what we did through the Vet Ready program, is we closed this gap, right? Some people thought there's no problem. Other people identified a problem. And in this gap, people said, man, I've got to do this, and I've got to do this. And you talked about it, right? It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
And one of my keynotes is about closing the 25-yard gap, and that is in the face of failure, what you brought up. So
that's interesting. We saw, and what I see with great leaders is they have this ability to, you're prepared for whatever. Again, in the emergency room, as an example, you don't know what's going to happen. You know what's going to walk in the door. It could be the flu. It could be a gunshot. It could be somebody, a car. You don't know, but you got to remain focused, and you've got to give direction to people quickly, because now we're talking life and death. This is not, well, let me get the consultant in here and think about it.
Right. That's right. That's right. Absolutely. So when you dice, because you're using the emergency room example, but think about how many times, Frank, if you truly care about your job, right?
Mhm.
Just like a finely conditioned athlete, right? Or or even in business or anything else, you have to do repetitions, right? You can't lift 1,000 pounds until you can do 10 reps with 350,
Right.
right? And so you have to do repetitions. And you know, I know you did this because I can tell you cared about being in the ER. When you're driving to the grocery store, you're doing a code in your head. You're going, the patient comes in, they need CPR, those kind of things. And so, that's the issue. Frank, give me 5 seconds. Five
No
seconds.
problem. No problem. No problem. Now, Dave, we're going to get into a little bit further, has some books out, and one that I just read over the weekend, Giving Back. And we're going to touch on that a little bit when he comes in. And he talks about learning life and learning hard. So we'll touch on
You
that
you
in a
can.
few minutes. Go ahead, sir.
I'm sorry. So, yeah. So you did mental repetitions, right?
Absolutely.
So why don't people do mental reps on their day-to-day stuff? They get lazy, they get into routine, they get comfortable, they don't challenge themselves. I had somebody talking to me the other day about quote unquote best practice. And 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 I said, we need to stop using that term, because somebody else put a little bug in my ear, might have been you, about best practice. And I thought, that's it. We've screwed this up, because we go into places and we go, this is the best practice. Automatically people are defensive. They feel like they've gotten a C- on something, and they start to struggle, and you get into this FOMO thing, and they do things for the wrong reasons. The mental repetition is your next practice. So even if you're good at that code, Frank, and you remember, because it changed constantly, right?
Yeah.
Even if you're good at that code, if the cardiologist comes in the next day and says, we now give this drug instead of this drug, now you got to go back and do mental reps with the new drug, and you have to decondition yourself from the old drug because it doesn't exist anymore,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
And if you're leading, because as I write in the book, knowledge is power only when shared. If you're leading, you get everybody else to do mental repetitions on the new drug, so that you bring everybody along, instead of somebody looking silly during the code trying to do it the old way when the new way is in place. Because what happens 9 times out of 10 is somebody goes, well, you didn't know this? And they act like somebody's, a total blithering idiot. And it's probably not their fault, because we didn't give them the opportunity to catch up.
Exactly. Best practice is a term that just drives me out of my mind. I hear organizations say that, and then it follows up. Well, I'm following the best practice, but I'm floundering. Okay. Well, if it's not working for you, then it's not a best practice.
That's right. That's right. And don't go buy a book that's
Yes.
got some that's got some title on it that says the XY. We can get into some of the more wealthy authors that write on leadership, but you can't tear out the back page of the book that's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 steps. You can't pin that on your cubicle and then turn around while all of your people are leaving your organization, they're leaving you, and go, but I'm doing these 10 things, what's wrong? That is not how this works. And you should always be working on your next practice. But you got to bring everybody along with you. So this will dovetail into Vet Ready when we get there, because it really is about next practice, not best practice.
Exactly. And it's put in a situation, again, great leaders that I reported to in the military and corporate were open. Because they always say, well, Frank, they just dictate it. No, they don't just dictate everything. You have your opportunity. You want to bring something up, that's fine. Bring something up, but have a solution or a potential solution.
Always, always, always. Because if you want your leaders to listen, then you have to take on a little bit of their pain.
Yep.
If you can't feel and this is part of the responsibility of the leader, knowledge is power only when shared, right? So if you are having financial difficulties, which drive you to make decisions that can make people uncomfortable, don't just make the decisions and tell them what to do. Give them the situation. Build a level of empathy so that they can advocate for you. And when you turn your followers into advocates, then they do the hard things. If you leave gaps in knowledge, then you should expect them to fail. You got to have tools. You know as well as I do, and especially in the Army. Morale in the United States Army is a working rifle. That's all a soldier wants. He wants equipment that works.
Yep.
He wants the right flak vest, the right helmet, he wants the state-of-the-art stuff so that he's prepared. The rest of it, he'll go a little bit hungry. He'll eat MREs until he's sick. He'll do almost anything. He'll sleep in the dirt. Give him broken equipment, morale goes to the bottom, and they leave. They leave the organization because you're not taking care of them.
I think a good example we spoke about before was COVID. Now, we both worked in hospitals. Being a hospital administrator, it's a challenging job, but it's kind of routine.
Right.
Then COVID comes along and the world goes upside down because they're not prepared. They weren't prepared. They weren't prepared for the crisis, nor were they prepared on how to address it. That's what you do.
Right. Right. So where you left that off is kind of a pain point for me, but it also drove me to really focus on that ready, because in my transition, I learned a lot of lessons. The most damaging thing you can do to a veteran or anybody that has spent their life building subject matter expertise is to discredit them. So for instance, we don't do that military stuff here, or we don't do that incident management stuff here, or I appreciate your opinion, but we're going to do it this way, even though you're supposed. So between the infectious disease doctor and myself, we were the experts in our region on the COVID stuff. And we were quickly pushed into the corner of the room and told to really be quiet, because what we were doing is giving the knowledge and giving the raw feedback from our experiences, and kind of mapping out the future. And because that scared them, truly, fear and pain drive a lot of negative responses. Because we scared them, and because they weren't prepared, they had not thought through long-term financial instability. They had not thought through loss of staffing. They had not thought through hospital expansion. They had not thought through a lot of things. And because of that fear and pain, they didn't want a new structure. They didn't want the right form of leadership, and they definitely did not want subject matter expertise, because that was too hard for them. The organizations that, now I'll give you the example. I left the hospital system right as COVID was starting because of this. Now I was pushed in the corner. I said, you don't need me. I've got to go someplace else. It's not going to work. So I went to the university system, and like I was telling you with my buddy, and the leader of the university was just coming on right in the middle of it. So we had started with the COVID stuff through interim leader, and then the new leader came. And regardless of what her motives were, she said out loud to everybody, Dave is the chancellor. She was the chancellor. She goes, Dave is the chancellor of COVID. The buck stops with Dave. All things COVID. And because she laid that foundation in, as me being the subject matter expert, and her declaring, I don't know what I'm doing, Dave needs to, it changed the whole thing. And we got to places and did things in that institution that everybody in the institution thought was impossible. But because we were getting the yes and moving forward, and I was empowered as a subject matter expert, we succeeded. And I'll tell you, Frank, I honestly had to, when I put the team together, and you'll probably sympathize or empathize with this, when I put the team together, I told them two things. I said, one, to do this, some of you are going to have to work for people that work for you in the other structure because of their subject matter expertise. So the name badge that you wear on your day-to-day work needs to come off. You need to fall in line wherever we need you to make this happen. Right. Just be a follower. And I said, and two is, we are going to get to yes on every problem. Not that we're going to do it, but we're going to get to yes. And if there's a resourcing financial, if there's some constraint that doesn't allow us to do it, that's fine. But we're going to get to yes. As soon as we did those two things, everything started to operate perfectly. And you have to give a lot of information. We shared a lot of information.
When you set the expectations correctly, and that's what people are looking for, what I found in the corporate world also, is they want to know where you're going to go. Where are we going with this?
Right. And
how do you intend to get there? And then are you going to take input from them?
Right.
And stepping back as a corporate CEO, and entry-level people would come up and say, Frank, this doesn't make a lot of sense. And I said, well, tell me about it. Well, you're right. It doesn't. I don't see it. I'm not down at that level.
Right.
You do. Bring it up.
Right. So I try to tell leaders, even, through veteran transition, but when I'm speaking more macro, in fact, I'm giving this speech here in a couple of weeks to medical group managers, the statewide convention. And I'm going to talk about tactical awareness. And, that comes from a little bit of a military thing, but you have all of the right, no matter where you sit in an organization, to walk past 3 layers of leadership below you and to go be tactically aware. This is not micromanagement. This is actually just looking at something. I mean, opening a closet door or stopping a housekeeper, a custodial worker, saying, what's going on? Are we meeting your needs? How's things going? Because you know what the custodial worker says? If they're comfortable with you and they've seen you, you're present. Presence is, in my book, you got to be present before you can do any of this. Eventually, you know what they say? All the mop handles are broken. Unless you're 5'1", you're going to get back pain mopping. Well, why are they broken? Well, somebody said there's not enough money, which is probably not true, but somebody's not equipped with the right information or the right resources, right? And you go fix that. That shouldn't be an insult to anybody.
Right.
Because you need to have understanding of tactical awareness. I wrote a blog the other day about, I invented a guy named Randy the Rat. And Randy the Rat's the guy that's walking past the captain on the ship jumping overboard. Right? Imagine if the captain of the ship just put his arms out and said, Randy, stop. Why are you leaving? Because you know what Randy's going to say? There's a big hole in the bottom of the ship. We're all swimming around down there. I'm just as good overboard as I am down there. So I'm getting off. If you said, wait, stop, Randy, don't leave. Walk me to the hole. And you fix the hole, then all the rats stay. And you don't have return over. You don't have retention problems. You don't have recruiting problems. You don't have all the financial pain that goes along with all of those, the human resource management thing, which I don't like those words, but I haven't come up with something better yet. Because humans are not resources, they're humans. And so it's just human management or humaning. But we don't do that. We don't do that because we've got the wheel, right? And if I've got the wheel, then I'm large and in charge. And when I used to be a rat, I got some water on my feet too. So Randy just needs to suffer. It's absolutely not the way. And until we figure that out, Frank, until we close, I think we've gone 2 generations of ignoring formal and informal leadership in all of our corporations across America, and we're paying the price for that now.
I would agree. I agree with you. We had, as you're transitioning with veterans, and the veterans are coming in, I did a thing in Houston with the oil and gas industry.
Yeah.
And I gave an example. You got a 21-year-old graduate from Rice and 21-year-old specialist, whatever, right? Who you can hire. Well, I get the guy from Rice. Go, well, what's he done? What's he accomplished? Right? This specialist, whatever, had to show up every day for 3, 4, 5 years, every single day. Had to find ways around stuff, had to get solutions, had to be managed people, and was in charge of millions of dollars of equipment. How do you get that across when you're trying to combine? Here's what the veteran brings community. This is what you need to understand.
Right. So, to your example, that makes me kind of smile, because when you look at the guy that you're talking about, right, and you're looking at your Rice, for those of you that don't know where Rice is, I mean, it's not cheap, and it's highly thought of, and if you do an undergraduate degree there, it's a feeder to Harvard Med and everything else. You can go do whatever. So I just follow Rice because I follow their football team because they're always so bad, and I'm an underdog, or I root for underdogs. But if you take that, and you look at that, you say, well, okay, well, Frank and Dave, yeah, fine, that makes sense. But, we can only look at resumes and do things. But let me tell you who figured that out. Let me tell you who's changed, who's on to their next practice. Exactly with what we're talking about. It's a little tiny company that's called Walmart. And Walmart just said, you don't need a degree to work in the C-suite anymore. Because if you start at the bottom of this company and you work your way up and you demonstrate your ability to cut through the ladders, if you started with a high school diploma and you're standing here with a high school diploma, we're going to take all of that knowledge, all of that experience, and have some loyalty in you for all of your service. And you're going to compete on an equal footing with anybody else that just came out of Rice with an MBA or whatever. Why did they do that, Frank? because that's not a company that screws around. They don't lose money. If Walmart spends $5 million, they make 15.
They do.
So why did they do that? They did that because what you said is right. But look how long it took them to figure it out. So I encourage the listeners, whoever picks this up, if you don't get anything out of this, go Google that and look that up and see, because I mean, they put it together. It's in policy, it's procedure, and it's totally messaged down to the bottom employee. So how do you feel when you start off at Walmart and you're pushing carts in the parking lot?
Mhm.
You have an opportunity to actually be a vice president of something someday, and there's a path for you.
And there is. I interviewed Dr. Edward Hess. He's a futurist from the Darden School at the University of Virginia. And he told me, he said, I'm going to read what he said. Too often, corporate America is promoting high-performing individual contributors into management, but they're not prepared to lead. All right? You just made that statement.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And why would you not, when you have two generations of non-deliberate development of leaders, now we have people in, as I write in the book, we have people that are in positions that require leadership that can't identify leadership because they don't know what it looks like.
Right.
And so the way that they got where they got was being really good at the job that they had. So I'm working with a construction company, and I'm working on his pain points because we're doing VAT ready, right? And so I'm going to help him kind of fill some gaps with the veteran population. And he says, I'm really stuck right now, Dave, because I'll take my best carpenter, I'll make them a site supervisor, and they fail. And I've got to go through 4 of them before I get 1. I'm going to help him with this, and some of that's aptitude, right? And
Yes.
and the things to look for. But in corporate America, for some reason, we ignore this and we get into this churn. And people don't realize when you turn over an employee, it is 30 to 50% of the full FTE to turn them over.
That's right.
So a $100,000 employee costs you 30 to 50 to replace. You can't afford to do that. Healthcare is right in the middle of this, Frank. I think you and I talked about
Yeah,
this.
we did.
My wife is, God bless her, she's the good nurse of the two of us. She's doing rheumatology now, and I will tell you the stuff that's going on with her, work management and how they're doing the scheduling and how they're working with their providers and stuff. Maybe offline we'll talk about it. I don't want to get too detailed in it, but I will tell you, it just reeks of failure. I mean, it's an uncontrollable spin. There's no way out because the processes and practices that they're putting into place are survivalistic. They have nothing to do with next practice or improvement. It's all about survival.
Mhm.
And if you put somebody in a true survival situation, you know what they do, right?
That's right.
So there's desperation there, and it's kind of sad.
And panic sets in.
Yeah.
The other thing Dr. Hess told me was, she said, Frank, the role of manager says they're starting to understand it's over. It's enabler and facilitator. If you can't do that, you might be the world's greatest carpenter, but you're not an enabler, you're not a facilitator, but you're a great carpenter. Yeah, we still need you, but let's get somebody in there who can take that skill you have and incorporate it into the big picture.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, the problem that you see is that when you do move that carpenter up and he's not qualified, they go back to their comfort zone. So the guy that's supposed to be running the site is actually still framing.
That's right.
And you're like, why are you framing? I need you. You should be, you should be doing this. And well, they needed a little bit of help. No. That's not what you do. Then you go hire somebody. Go hire another framer, right? If they need help, you go hire another framer. You don't feel it, but they run there because they're comfortable, because they haven't been groomed. I mean, they don't have foundational skills to move up into that. And so it's a continuum. And it really starts in 5th grade. In my opinion, it starts in 5th grade. In disaster management, if you can teach something to 5th graders, you'll teach the whole community, because the 5th graders go home and teach their parents. So you should never teach anything at a collegiate. Don't teach at a collegiate level. Teach at the 5th grade level, and it for some reason it inculcates in whole communities.
I've heard this. I've interviewed a lot of educators, and the more progressive ones have been saying, we missed the boat here. We got to bring the skills, social, emotional learning. We got to bring this down now. Second grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade.
Yeah.
Now, what COVID helped, COVID was awful, but one of the things COVID did is it set back people, children.
Yeah.
She says, I interviewed a 2nd grade teacher. She said, we spend 90% of our time on social, emotion, learning, how to act, how to react, how to understand. So we're talking about empathy. Just 2 7-year-olds.
Yeah.
Those are the people who are coming up. That's the way it should have been. And these educators at Rice, I interviewed some of them, said they have no clue when they get here.
Right.
That's something that they said, well, you should have gotten that in the home. Well, if your parents had never been trained, how are they going to do?
I was at Gettysburg College doing a senior leadership course. And I don't know if you know about Gettysburg, but Gettysburg's one of those feeders to Harvard Law and all the other things. And at that time, this is years ago, so I'm sure it's at least a 25% higher. At that time, it was $52,000 to $55,000 a year to go there. And I said to one of our instructors that taught there at the college was a former ambassador to Estonia. And I said, this must be a slam dunk. I said, these kids all come from, really affluent families. I said, they must just come in here and get straight to work. He goes, it's a zoo. He goes, they get here, they lose their minds. He goes, it's romper room. I said, are you kidding? He goes, no. He goes, you take them from that environment and you put them in this environment. He goes, we have to work on their structure. We got to work on their discipline and all of those type of things. And I thought, how ironic. Because to your point, what were they getting in 5th grade? Were they facing any adversity? Did they have, I don't know, both of my boys are Eagle Scouts. Probably the best thing that ever happened to them was getting into Scouts and becoming an Eagle Scout, because they've got a badge that says the finance badge, and they've got a badge that talks about, how to shoot a bow and arrow, and they got a badge on how to do survival stuff. And that stuff is important. And it started at an age where it's inculcated. There's been a couple of times where, they'll call me up and go, it's a good thing I'm an Eagle Scout because this happened. And I kind of sorted that out. So that's just an example, but yeah.
One example that I ran into, Dave, I read a book called Grit by Dr. Angela Duckworth.
Right.
And I'm sure you've run into it, right?
Yeah.
With the book, West Point was having a massive dropout problem, and they started recruiting kids in 7th grade. Right. The best of the best of the best. That's what they're looking for. What she said to them is, the best of the best of the best never had adversity. They never had a struggle to get a grade. They never had a fight to make a football team.
Right.
They weren't the prom king.
Right.
The kids that had gone through that and learned that when the Army finally adjusted and started asking different questions, they got a better retention rate.
Right.
That's what veterans bring to the party.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so let me shift that a little. Let me shift that conversation a little bit so we can continue, because I know this is a great segue to Vet Ready. How do you find out if somebody has grit? So think about that, because the academy had a process. Let's call that a hiring process, right?
Perfect.
The academy had a process. And as you know, the military is tied to 2 things: doctrine and process. And don't deviate from either one, right? Because those are written in stone. That's religion. So if you want to change the military, you have to change the doctrine and the process, especially in the United States Air Force. The United States Air Force is uber process driven, big time. The Navy, not so much. The Navy has to color outside the lines because they don't have lines on a map, like the Army or the Air Force. But so they were tied to a process. Somebody from the outside, somebody from not inside of your culture, had to come and say, here's what your process produces. Here's the product that you want. Your process is not producing the product because you don't have a process to identify the traits that you want in your product. So what should you do? Well, they had to change the process, right?
Exactly.
So they had to look at applications differently. And they had to talk, they probably had to go to Congress and say, hey, when you're sponsoring people to come to these academies, you know, you have to have some sort of congressional sponsorship to go to the academy. When you're sponsoring them, have your staff ask these questions, you know, and so things like being an Eagle Scout actually matter on an academy resume, you know, academy application, and those type of things. So you had to change the process. So I'm a civilian employer. I've got high turnover, retention, recruiting problems. I have I've hired some veterans, and most of them leave in the first, half of them leave in the first year, and 80% of them are gone in the first 2 years. Can't figure out why, but I don't want to hire veterans anymore. And then you say, okay, well, what's your process? Well, my process is when the resume comes in, we do a word search. And then when the word search matches up with the job, the application, when the word search matches up, they go into the pile where we actually review those. Then when we review those, we look for certain things. You know, we look for exclusionary criteria, like you have to have a bachelor's degree, or you have so, and then anything that's excluded out of that thing, we take those out of the pile, and then we're down to just kind of looking through things and maybe looking at depth of experience and those kind of things. And we weed it down to 2 or 3, and then we do interviews. Well, out of all those, that pile that got thrown in the trash, probably all of your veterans are in there, because your process doesn't serve the veteran, because you don't know about aptitude. You don't know how to decipher a resume, nor do you have anybody on your staff that will help you to do that. You don't know how to align them with actually jobs. Most veterans don't. Most veterans apply to medium to large companies for jobs that they're not qualified for, yet they're qualified for 6 others that haven't been filled for a year and a half. But the process doesn't serve the veteran. Now, let's go back to failure, because that's called failure.
Yes.
Because what comes after thank you for your service is this. And so we have failed the veteran. From the time the veteran gets out to the time that they navigate this world, 10 years for me, which still hasn't been perfect, we have failed our veterans. Veterans Administration's there for macro stuff, oversight and some funding and macro stuff. But the Veterans Administration isn't in Circle, Montana. It's not in, you know, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. It's, you know, it's not. It's in Chicago. I mean, you can feel it, you know, the bigger places. So we have failure. So what do we do when we have failure? We ask who, right? And so who's failing? Well, you would say that maybe large government's failing, the Veterans Administration's failing, maybe some state stuff is failing, but in essence, the employer's failing. I'm not saying employers are bad, but they're failing because they're tied to process. The veteran's failing because they don't have any tools. They don't have the right side picture, and they're failing because of what their DNA is, right? We're like hot dogs. You put a hot dog in a microwave, when you pull it out, the DNA is changed. You're never going to change it back. So you have this failure. So now what do? We ask the question, were you trained? The answer on the employer side is no, and the answer on the veteran side is no. And so you have this gap, which is, you know, one of my keynote speeches is a 25-yard gap, and you have to close this gap. So I'm in an organization. I have non-veterans and veterans in the room. They built a horseshoe, which I just laughed because, you know, all of us in the military, you have to, if you're going to start speaking publicly, you got to get in the horseshoe, because if you can do that, you can do it with anybody. What happened? Veterans on one side, non-veterans on the other. There was one outlier on each side. And as I facilitated, I asked the first question. I said, non-veterans, give me descriptives of the veterans. Glowing, courageous, leader, blah, blah. I mean, just glowing stuff. The adjectives you would want in front of your children's names. I said, veterans, describe to the non-veterans your transition, how you feel, how you describe yourself. Broken, tired, disconnected, no sense of purpose, loss of pride. There's tears. Frank, there was tears in the room. We finished with this is the initial portion of that, right? We finished with the first 3.5 to 4 hours. 45-year-old guy looks at me and says, I was raised by a Marine. I have never understood my father his entire life until right now. He said, now I get it. Because he changed in his mind, he changed his bias, he changed his perception, he changed his assumptions. because we closed the gap. And I had very, very courageous veterans tell. One of the veterans, which was amazing to me. It even made me start to look at things a little bit different. One of the non-veteran ladies said, my husband and I, she caught me at church, and she goes, my husband and I went to a diner 2 days after we did that. And she goes, they had pictures of the veterans on the window. She goes, I see all of those faces completely differently now. I said, well, good for you. One of the veterans, Frankie's got tattoos from his knuckles on both hands, from his knuckles all the way to his neck. And these are vivid picked skulls and crossbones and weapons and all that stuff. And he sits there and he looks across the room at everybody and goes, you know, I have these tattoos. He says, because I don't want anybody to talk to me. He goes, these are my, this is my defense.
That's my goodness.
He goes, and that's the only reason they're there. You probably think that they're there for 1,000 reasons, or speaks to me who I am. He goes, this is my protection against the world, because I don't want you in my world. Now he's changed that. He's worked on that and he's changed that. So what's the Vet Ready program do? It goes in, it finds out the who, finds out the process, it finds out those things. It closes this gap. It gets people on to their next practice. Because we're products of two things, Frank. We're products of our genetics, which today I feel like a product of my genetics, and I need to go for a walk and loosen up my bones. I'm predisposed to arthritis, and today is one of those days where it's like, yeah, it's coming, and we're products of our environment. And you and I are old enough to remember the movie Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd. Listen, that's the veteran experience. You're in this environment, you got battle buddies, you got a uniform, there's no doubt about your purpose. You got the camaraderie and you got the lingo and the language, and you're highly accomplished. And you walk out one day and people say things to you like, we don't do that military stuff here. You know what a veteran does when they hear that? They get on Indeed and they start looking for the next gig. And they keep bouncing around and bouncing around. And the reason they bounce around, Frank, is there's no home. There's no environment. So employers that really, really, really want to do what should come after thank you for your service, they need to build an environment that is veteran ready. Now, the argument is, why should I do that for veterans and nobody else? Well, the answer is you're already doing it for somebody else. The American Disabilities Act tells you exactly what to do with disabled people. We have protections against race and creed and gender and age and all those things. We have protections against all those. You go in the American Disabilities Act and it hedges on veterans with PTSD, and it talks about nothing else. So
That's right.
Part of the rest of my mission is, and I've written some of it, and I've kind of pushed it into the right corners of the world, and hopefully we can start doing some work on that. There needs to be an amended chapter in the American Disabilities Act that talks about this phenomenon, because people would say, well, why should I get involved? Well, by the time you and I are finished with this conversation, Frank, at least 1 or 1.5 veterans will have taken their lives. Probably 1 or 2 are experiencing their first bout of homelessness. And probably 1 or 2 are in some sort of survival mode from their substance abuse. And they can't get access to, 1 or 2 can't get access to mental health needs that they need today. And in Montana, we're chronically number 1 and number 2 and always in the top 5 of substance problems, mental health problems, suicide, and homelessness. And we're 44th in services. The only way you fix an epidemic like that, Frank, is the way this country's fixed everything, which is through public-private partnership, which means that the private industry has got to step up and take some corporate veteran responsibility and implement things like the Vet Ready program if you really want to truly give back. Because what you get, once you change your process and change your mindset, what you get is invaluable once you realize it. Now, if you think I'm crazy, go talk to Walmart.
Exactly. I was a mentor with the Veteran Treatment Court for a couple of years, and you saw a lot of that was, look, veterans, they're not going to listen to you if you're not a veteran. First off, so if somebody from the outside comes in and says, well, you should, and the veteran recoils and says, what the hell do you know? You weren't there. You don't understand.
Right.
Right. But so we had mentors, veteran mentors.
Sure.
And part of it was, guys and ladies, we have to adjust to.
Yeah,
We can't just come
absolutely.
home and say, I served, therefore you should give me. Yeah, nobody gives you anything. They didn't give you a damn thing in the military either. You have to earn it, which means we have to make some adjustments, which you're
Yeah,
doing with the vet ready.
correct.
The other
Correct.
side of the vet ready, which is incredibly important, is letting them know, like we did with the oil and gas people in Houston, why are you not looking at this? Why are you not looking at characteristics and traits and what they call soft skills, which are not even close to soft?
Right.
Bring that in because that's intrinsic to the human. That's what the person is. You can teach
Right.
them the job, correct?
Right. That's right. That's exactly right. Oh, absolutely. They are so qualified to go into jobs like project management and logistics and those type of things, even though that if their military things didn't line up with it. Because give a veteran something to do, especially if it's being in charge of people. The tactical piece of it, the hands-on piece, they'll learn it fast. I mean, really fast. I mean, they'll make themselves an expert in it, uber quick. This is not about getting up on the high dive and jumping in.
That's right.
Wade into it. People, let's use all the cliche stuff. Beta test it. Compartmentalize it. Put it into a high performing area so that because they're good at stuff. Put it in some place where it's going to have its maximum ability to succeed. Right. Don't change your policies or procedures yet. Don't do any of that. They don't all have to be congruent. Let's just do a touchy feely. Let's just pick one or two people. Let's just try it. Just try it. And the reason I say that with such confidence, Frank, is what's going to happen if they try it. And it usually sounds like this. Why weren't we doing this 10 years ago? So it's all there. And listen, I tell people I don't work with veterans. There's a lot of veteran service organizations that work with veterans. They're entry points. I love it. And they need to be there. And they've done good work. And that's great. And there's some of them that are out there that say, give us a call and we'll align you with a job. They'll find you a job. But I think you and I talked about, the daycare scenario, right?
Yeah.
If you're gonna take your kid to daycare, you don't take your kid to daycare. You go to the daycare. You walk every corner. You look at the kitchen. You talk to them about food allergies. You talk to 10 parents that have their kids at that daycare. And if you do take your kid to that daycare, you vet your kid to make sure that they're thriving and they're comfortable and they like the environment. They like the environment.
Right.
Right? Veterans, we drop you off at the curb. We go in that building. I hope it works out for you.
That's how it was. I remember.
Absolutely. And the thing is that none of us are immune. You can be a 4-star general retired, and none of us are immune. I was like, General Miley was testifying on Capitol Hill. Not that we have to talk about his testimony. He's testifying on Capitol Hill, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, "Yep, you're just like everybody else. You took the uniform off. You look 20 years younger. You're 20 pounds lighter. You just look like the weight of the world's off of your shoulders." And I don't think people understand. The number one most stressful job in the United States of America is general officer in the military, and the number 2 job is enlisted in the military. Those are the 2 most stressful jobs in America. Think about that statistically. Look up the top 5; it'll amaze you. And then the ones below that are civilian line, and you would imagine you'd go, yeah, that looks stressful. Yeah, look that up. Yeah, so when you think about that, you go, okay, well, they have stressful jobs. But what does stress do? What does that do? It makes you grow. I mean, it puts everything else in a different light. Veterans walk into your organization, they sit in meetings, and they just smile because these big macro mountains of problems. And you look at it and you go, that is a 3-minute phone conversation, and we're on to the next thing in my other world.
Yes.
And veterans can create that for you as long as you empower them, put them in the right place. And there's a lot of veterans. I read something yesterday where somebody said, officers and senior enlisted people need to get used to the fact that when they get hired in the civilian world, that it's going to be a couple rungs below where they normally served, because that's just how it is. And I say, that's how it is right now. But it doesn't mean that that's right. It doesn't mean that we're doing it the right way. There's a lot of veterans that walk into your organization that can fit right at least into your senior directorships, if not into your C-suite.
Exactly. Well, this has been amazing and enlightening as always.
know,
Every
that's-
time I talk to you, it is. What last words you want to leave with the audience around the world, Dave?
Well, I told my boys when they were growing up to make a positive difference in some small way every day. And I think if, collectively we start doing that, uh, the sky's the limit on who we can be and what we can be as a country and as a people. And, as we start to come back together here and find common ground and work on that. So that's my challenge really to everybody is, there's enough going on out there that it's really easy to complain. In fact, you don't even burn calories complaining, but burn a few calories and just make a positive difference in just somebody's life or in some small way. And that'll come back to you. But as a whole, we just get better.
How do people get a hold of you?
I make it easy. So www.maxfab consulting.com. Books are on there. Blogs are on there, podcasts are on there. How to get a hold of me is on there. Click on my calendar, schedule 60 minutes with me, and it's free, and we can chat. If you're a business owner and you think, boy, I don't know if I can afford Dave's program and those type of things. We're working on some stuff to see if we can offset that with some grant money so that we take away that obstacle of some sort of financial obligation. I've tried to make this thing as affordable as possible. It's not about me making money. It's about veterans having a home and a place to thrive. And so we've found the balance in there. So yeah, don't be scared of me. I'm still learning. So pick up the phone. Let's have a conversation. You might teach me something, and then it just makes me better. It makes us better, and then it makes the world better, and especially for the veteran space. So
Exactly. And I'll have all Dave's information when this thing goes public, so you'll be able to
yeah,
reach him.
yeah.
As I said, we're just about out of time here. I want to thank my friend David here. He's used this extensive leadership and training, and he's giving back. And that's what it's all about. And that's what his one book is giving back. Take what you've learned, take what you've excelled at, and give it back. Now you can see this show on my podcast called Life Altering Events. It'll be on my YouTube channel, which is also called Frank Zaccari. I also keep things simple. And Parade Deck. And I will send links to Dave, and he'll post it everywhere in his world.
Yeah.
So if you use my YouTube channel or his YouTube channel, please subscribe. Let me leave you with this. None of us are in this alone. And the secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are. And today, Dave showed us where many, many of those rocks are. Join us again next week. We look at another life-altering event. Dave, again, thank you so much.
Be blessed.